Hey there guys, this is Cole. Welcome back to another horror movie review for the season of October. And today, we are on Halloween horror movie review, season 1, episode 16. And today's horror movie I'm going to be reviewing is the 1982 horror movie classic, Creepshow, directed by George A. Romero. Now, this movie celebrated its 43rd anniversary this year. Actually tonight, I got to see this movie in theaters because the movie theater that I go to, well, there's another theater where I live that I go to, the Budget Theater, and basically every once in a while they'll put older classic movies back in theaters. And now I really like this movie, but to be honest, I had only seen this movie once in 2019, and it had been a while since I watched it. But then I heard that at the Budget Theater that it was going to be put back in theaters, so I'm like, cool. So I decided to take my dad and my girlfriend because number one, they like horror movies, and number two, they had never seen it before, and number three, it had been a while since I watched it. So this was kind of like my chance to rewatch it, but this time on the big screen, and we all had a good time with it. But so anyways, what is the plot to the 1982 movie Creepshow? Well, the plot of the movie is as follows. A compendium of 5 short but terrifying tales combined within a single feature full-length movie. This movie conjures scares from traditional boogeymen and importance of doom. So that's basically the plot synopsis to the movie. Well, anyways, how was this movie received? Well, when this movie was released on November 12th, 1982 in the U.S., it received positive reviews from critics and audiences, making $21 million worldwide on an $8 million budget, and it was so successful that it had a second movie in 1987. And then in 2006, there was a direct-to-video third film, which, yeah, that movie is absolutely terrible. We don't need to talk about Creepshow 3. And Creepshow was so successful that they did 2 sequels, and then in 2019, a streaming service called Shudder made a 4-season television series of Creepshow, which I have not yet seen the TV show, but I have heard really good things about it. And even though I don't have Shudder, the first 3 seasons of the TV show are available on DVD. So as a fan of the movie, I've heard the show is really good, so I would like to really check out the original, I'd like to check out the TV series someday and get it on DVD. Now, as for my reaction to the movie, yeah, Creepshow, directed by George A. Romero, is excellent, and this is definitely the best horror anthology movie, no doubt about it. And one thing I really appreciate about this movie is the creativity of the 5 stories. So, without further ado, let's get into my review. So, the movie starts off where we are introduced to a little boy and his parents, and the little boy is basically reading this comic book from a comic book series called Creepshow, which is a comic book that pays homage to classic 50s horror, and the boy's a little kid. However, the dad is not happy that he's reading that, so then the dad basically takes it away from him and basically throws it in the trash outside. And then the kid goes upstairs to his room, and then he basically sees a skeleton, a floating ghost-like skeleton by his window and stuff like that. And then the movie then zooms in onto the garbage can, and we see the comic book. And one thing I really like about this movie, now, I will say 95% of this movie is live action, but there's maybe 2 to 3% animation, which I think is rather cool. And so when this happens, the camera then zooms on to the ghost, the skeleton ghost that we see by the little boy's window, and then the scene goes from live action to animation, and then the camera then cuts to the comic book, and throughout the course of the movie, the comic book is basically what tells the stories. And and then it'll say story number 1, and then it'll cut to a comic book panel, and then we see these sequences play out, but instead of animation, it's in live action, which is pretty cool. And the first story of this movie is called Father's Day, which in the first story of the movie Father's Day, there is a daughter who now is like a much older woman who basically killed her dad, who basically murdered her dad on Father's Day. And then there's a whole part in the movie where the daughter who did that, she basically goes to her dad's grave at the graveyard, and she says Happy Father's Day, and she gives him these flowers. And then her dad comes back to life as a zombie to haunt her from the grave and to basically seek revenge on his daughter, which I thought, okay, that was a rather creative part of the movie. And then not long after that, because this woman was visiting a house that multiple people were at, one of the people in that house, because she's been gone for a while, decides to go investigate, and then the zombie, and then the guy basically finds the daughter buried on the ground, who was buried by her zombie dad, and then the zombie dad manages to make another person one of the victims and stuff like that. And then basically what happens is that the dad never got a chance to get the cake that his daughter was meant to give him. So there's a whole part in the movie where he basically serves a dinner cake to two of the guests that freak out because the cake has a person's head on it. And one thing I will say that does hold up really well about this movie, the practical effects hold up really well in this movie. Like, there's no CGI, there's no digital work. It's all 100% practical, and I appreciate that. And I mean, that story right there, I mean, that is quite a way to start off a horror movie. And yeah, but anyways, now we then cut to story 2 of the movie, which is my second favorite segment of the movie, where and the name of this story is called The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, where a farmer who is played by Stephen Kane discovers a meteorite that transforms him and everything around him into plant life, which I thought was a rather cool concept, where Stephen Kane basically plays this farmer. He finds this meteorite, and and I do like this scene because before he starts turning into a plant, like, he's thinking that this meteor is gonna be valuable, and I like the whole scene where he basically is picturing in his head like him trying to like sell it to like a guy to get money off it for like $200. I thought that sequence is actually quite funny. And then the farmer, played by Stephen Kane, because the meteorite had this green liquid, he goes inside his house and he starts to notice that his body is changing, and he's starting to turn into it's starting to turn him and everything else around him into plant life and stuff like that. And eventually he can't deal with it anymore, and then he becomes like this green plant monster where you can't see his face and stuff like that. And so he decides to put himself out of his own misery, which I thought, okay, that was a dark story, but it was rather effective. And like I said, one thing I really do appreciate about the movie is how creative it is with its storytelling. And of all the horror anthology movies out there, this would definitely be my favorite. And that's mainly due to the great cast and the great storytelling. We then now cut to the third story, which is by far my favorite segment of the movie. And this story is called Something to Tide You Over, where a husband's wife, and this is my favorite segment of the movie, where we have a husband who is actually played by Leslie Nielsen, who I rather like as an actor. And Leslie Nielsen, if you're not familiar with him, he was in the first 3 Naked Gun movies, which I've only seen the first Naked Gun movie from 1988, Naked Gun, The Files of the Police Squad, and the new Naked Gun movie of Liam Neeson, but I'm a fan of the Naked Gun movies, the original and the new one that I saw. Leslie Nielsen was also in Airplane, which is a spoof comedy from the 80s that I do rather like. But anyways, basically, in this story, the husband, who is played by Leslie Nielsen, is upset that his wife is cheating on him. So the husband decides to get revenge on the other man who's cheating on his wife by burying his own wife. Basically burying his own wife and lover up to their necks on the beach as an act of revenge, which I thought that was a rather creative bit of storytelling. And Leslie Nielsen is really good in this movie. Granted, he's not in it for long, but this honestly might be my favorite Leslie Nielsen performance, just because, you know, he always plays like good guys. Like, this is really the only time I've seen him play like an evil villain role, and I thought that he was great in it. But, however, as a result of this, when Leslie Nielsen, when the husband, played by Leslie Nielsen, buries the couple to their necks, he's taking a shower later that night, but then the couple come back for revenge, but as zombies, which I thought was rather creative. And before then, when Leslie Nielsen's when the evil person, when the demented husband, played by Leslie Nielsen, left the couple on the beach, he basically put a VCR to record it so he could record his own movies. But then, you know, I like the whole part when I really like the whole part when the zombies who were basically the couple buried up to their necks in the sand. I like when they come out of the water covered in seaweed, but as zombies, to basically get revenge on the demented husband, played by Leslie Nielsen, and then they bury him up to his neck and they record him on camera. I thought that was a really cool segment of the movie. And another thing that works really well about this movie is and one thing I will say works really well as about this movie is this movie has a really good cast. You got Leslie Nielsen as Richard Vickers. You got Tom Savini as Garbage Man 2. You got Stephen King as Jordy Verrill. You got Adrienne Barbeau as Wilma Northup. You got Ed Harris as Hank Bain, and Katie Krositz as the maid. And all those actors playing the characters give terrific performances. And also the character by the name of Hank, played by Ed Harris, that is the one who went to go investigate. He's the one that went to go investigate, you know, the daughter of the father who had been missing for a while. But anyways, getting back to the review, I also really like the design of the monsters, especially because of the makeup on the plant monster and the zombies done by Tom Savini. And then we get to the fourth story, where basically there is a monster in a crate discovered, and the crate was built in the 1800s. And this monster will basically eat anyone that comes across it, but then the guy who is a part of this, well, the guy who found it is a dad, but he works as a scientist, and then he gets his son to help him to, you know, bury the crate and dump it in the ocean. And then he's talking to his dad, and he says, oh, the monster is buried 50 feet under the water. And then the camera cuts to the monster's eyes, and then as soon as this segment's done, it shows it in comic book form. And then we cut to the fifth and final story of the movie, where basically there's this guy inside a lab who is basically attacked by hundreds, maybe even tens of thousands of cockroaches that basically end up, you know, destroying the guy. And that right there is also another good segment to the movie. And then the movie ends where, you know, once all the stories are told in the comic book, two garbage men basically find the comic book on the ground, and one of the garbage men is actually played by Tom Savini, who, if you're not familiar with Tom Savini, if you're not familiar with Tom Savini, he basically did the practical effects to the first Friday the 13th movie. So I thought, okay, it was cool to see that special effects artist play a garbage man. I thought that was cool, but anyways, he's basically looking at this comic book with the other garbage man, and they notice that one of the stories is about a voodoo doll being used to torture someone. And at the end of the movie, the dad, who basically took away the little kid's comic book at the beginning of the movie, he's basically using a needle and stabbing a voodoo doll, and which is hurting the dad. And he says, "How dare you take my comic book?" And then that's how the movie ends. So yeah, at the end of the day, I really like Creepshow. This movie's an instant horror classic. I'm definitely glad that I gave this a second watch, especially at the movie theater. And unfortunately, I do not own this movie on DVD, but I would really like to get it on DVD someday. I mean, when it comes to Creepshow 2, I like Creepshow 2 for what it is. Yeah, it's not as good as the first one, but for a sequel that George Romero did not direct to a first movie, I thought that it was actually not too bad. But the third one, yeah, the 2006 direct-to-video third one, yeah, that movie's an absolute steaming pile of garbage, but I'm probably not going to review that, at least not this October, because I feel like I need to save some energy for that, but yeah, at the end of the day, I really liked Creepshow. This is a fantastic movie directed by George A. Romero, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I am going to give Creepshow from 1982 a 10 out of 10. So yeah, guys, there we go. That was my review to Creepshow, and we'll catch you guys for the next review later.